The situation between India and Pakistan has, well, it's taken a really sharp and deeply concerning turn.
It really has.
We're jumping straight into this escalation today. It was triggered by a truly devastating attack. And we need to understand the ripple effects that have followed so quickly, too.
Yeah, the speed is alarming. What's striking, I think, is how swiftly a localized tragedy, horrific as it was, has just ballooned.
Right.
It's become this multifaceted international concern, touching on diplomacy, economics, and even, well, the possibility of military action.
So let's pinpoint the start. The event that set this all in motion was that horrific attack, April 22nd, 2025.
In Pahalgam.
Yes, in the Baisaran Valley, Pahalgam,
Yeah.
in Indian-administered Kashmir. Tragically, 26 lives were lost.
25 Hindu tourists and one local Muslim guide. A terrible loss.
Terrible. The Resistance Front, the TRF, they claimed responsibility. Pakistan condemned it, but denied involvement.
And they offered an international investigation, which is an interesting point.
Why?
Well, you could see it as them trying to, preemptively deflect blame, underscore their denial of any link to the TRF.
Makes sense. But India's reaction, it was immediate and forceful.
Definitely.
So our goal in this deep dive really is to unpack that sequence. India's actions, Pakistan's counteractions, the international reaction, and crucially, the impact on the people caught right in the middle of it all.
Okay, let's start with India's response then, because some of these moves were quite dramatic.
The Indus Waters Treaty suspension, for one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Suspending the 1960 Indus Waters Treaty, that's arguably the most impactful move, wouldn't you say?
I would. I mean, this treaty governs how the Indus River waters are shared. It's remarkably survived conflicts for decades.
It really has.
Yeah.
60-plus years.
And India's justification here, this is where it gets really interesting. They're directly linking the suspension to Pakistan's alleged support for cross-border terrorism.
Yeah, they're basically saying, look, the foundation for sharing water requires, no hostile actions from the other side.
And they argue that conditions been violated.
It's a fascinating linkage they're making, isn't it, between water resources and these broader security concerns.
Usually the treaty was seen as, well, technical, almost separate from the politics.
Insulated. Pakistan, as you'd expect, sees this suspension as a clear breach of international law.
And they plan to challenge it legally.
Which raises a big question, really. Can a treaty like this, focused on resource management, just be unilaterally suspended based on, well, these wider security claims?
It's a huge question. Okay, so beyond the water treaty, what else did India do? There were diplomatic steps too, right?
Yes, significant ones. They expelled Pakistani diplomats.
And then withdrew their own staff from Islamabad in return.
A reciprocal move, yeah. Severely reducing the High Commission presence on both sides.
That kind of diplomatic freeze, it really limits communication, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It makes any de-escalation effort so much harder when those direct channels are, well, practically shut down.
Like closing the very embassies meant to keep lines open. And the restrictions didn't stop there. Visas were canceled.
Yes. All previously issued visas to Pakistani nationals were revoked, and a travel ban imposed under the SARC visa exemption scheme.
For anyone not familiar, that scheme was meant to make travel easier between South Asian countries.
So something designed to connect the region is now another casualty of this tension.
This ban must have a personal impact, too. Families separated, that kind of thing.
No doubt. It hinders any informal dialogue, cultural exchange, you name it.
And then the borders.
The Attari-Wagah border crossing, a key transit point, was closed.
Yeah.
And all trade with Pakistan was suspended.
So a complete halt. That'll have economic consequences.
For both sides, yes, though perhaps felt more acutely in Pakistan, depending on the current trade balance and dependencies.
Okay. So India's response. Swift, comprehensive. Water, diplomats, visas, borders, trade. How did Pakistan react to all this? They couldn't have stayed quiet.
Oh, definitely not. Pakistan responded with very strong condemnation. They called India's actions provocative, destabilizing.
I heard their defense minister made a particularly strong statement.
He did, Khawaja Asif. He warned that any attempt by India to actually divert Indus River water would be considered an act of war.
An act of war. That's very serious language.
Extremely serious. A significant escalation in the rhetoric, for sure.
And it wasn't just words, was it? Pakistan took action, too.
Right. They announced the suspension of the 1972 Simla Agreement.
The Simla Agreement. That's been the framework for bilateral relations for, what, over 50 years?
Pretty much. Despite strains, it provided a way to manage things, resolve disputes peacefully, or at least try to.
So suspending it is like rejecting that whole established framework.
It signals exactly that, a move towards a possibly more unpredictable, maybe more confrontational dynamic. It emphasized bilateral talks, keeping third parties out. Suspending it changes that potentially.
What else? Airspace.
Yes, they closed Pakistani airspace to Indian airlines. That obviously disrupts travel patterns across the region quite a bit.
And mirroring India's diplomatic moves.
Pakistan also halted bilateral trade. They expelled Indian diplomats.
Tit for tat.
And they issued a directive for Indian military advisors to leave Pakistan by April 30th. So yeah, a clear pattern of reciprocal actions across the board, diplomatic, economic.
This mutual expulsion of diplomats, even if expected, it just further isolates them right when communication is needed most.
Exactly. It increases the risk of misunderstandings, miscalculations, fewer people on the ground to assess things, to facilitate any kind of dialogue.
And sadly, it's not just diplomacy and economics. Things seem to be heating up militarily along the line of control, too.
Yeah, that's the really worrying part now. We're seeing reports of exchanges of small arms fire across the Lines.
Which happens periodically, but feels different in this context.
It does. And Pakistan has also claimed to have shot down 2 Indian drones. India hasn't confirmed that as far as we know.
Still, the claim itself adds to the tension.
Absolutely. Plus, both sides are reportedly conducting intensive air patrols in the border regions.
These aren't just routine exercises, then.
Doesn't sound like it. It suggests a heightened state of alert, a readiness for, well, potential military confrontation.
All of this, understandably, has the international community quite concerned.
Very concerned. The world is definitely watching this closely.
What are we hearing from international bodies? The UN.
The UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, he's called for maximum restraint from both sides, urged dialogue, peaceful means.
Standard but necessary call. And the U.S.
The U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio also weighed in, called for immediate de-escalation, a return to diplomatic channels.
So, major powers are clearly seeing the danger here.
Yes, the level of international concern really underscores the potential for this crisis to destabilize things far beyond just India and Pakistan, wider geopolitical implications.
But amidst all this high-level diplomacy and military posturing, we absolutely have to focus on the human cost, especially for people in Kashmir.
They are, yet again, caught right in the middle. It's tragic.
What are we hearing from the ground there?
Well, there are concerning reports. Increased crackdowns, detentions by Indian security forces in areas suspected of, harboring militants.
And house demolitions mentioned, too.
Yes, instances of house demolitions as well. Now, these are often presented as necessary security measures.
But the impact on ordinary civilians is huge.
Inevitably. And it risks breeding further resentment, more instability down the line.
And the economy in Kashmir, it relies so heavily on tourism.
It does. And that's taken a massive hit already. The safety concerns, they're understandable, but they've led to widespread cancellations.
Jeopardizing livelihoods just as the main season might have been starting.
Exactly. This economic hardship just adds another layer of vulnerability for people there. It can worsen existing grievances, create a climate where, well, instability finds fertile ground.
So let's take stock. As we're talking, it's April 30th, 2025. The picture is, frankly, deeply worrying.
It is.
Both India and Pakistan have mobilized military forces. Diplomatic channels are severely restricted.
The risk of a full-scale conflict feels alarmingly high right now.
And the international community is just urgently calling for dialogue, hoping to prevent something truly catastrophic.
That mobilization of forces is probably the most dangerous sign. It shows both sides are, at least, preparing for the possibility of military action, even if it's not what they want.
And in that kind of tense environment,
the risk of a miscalculation or some small incident just spiraling completely out of control, it's significantly higher.
Okay, so to quickly summarize what we've covered in this deep dive, we started with a horrific attack,
which triggered a rapid, multi-layered escalation.
We saw diplomatic ties strained almost to breaking point, major economic measures from both sides,
A worrying increase in military activity along the Lale Sea.
profound international concern, and underlying it all, a severe impact on the lives of ordinary people, especially in Kashmir.
Exactly right. It's not just a series of isolated incidents. It's a chain reaction, really, rooted in a complex history, but fueled by these immediate responses that could have huge long-term consequences.
And, that brings us to a critical point for you, the listener, to consider. Given this long, often volatile history between India and Pakistan.
And the nuclear capability factor, which always looms in the background.
Right. Given all that, what do you think are the absolute most critical factors now, the things that will determine whether this crisis somehow de-escalates, finds a path back to dialogue?
Or tragically spirals further into a much, much more devastating conflict.
What needs to happen or not happen?
I think understanding the deeply entrenched views on both sides, the limitations of the communication channels right now, and maybe the role external diplomatic pressure can actually play. Those will be key.
It's an incredibly precarious situation.
It truly is.
We really encourage you to continue following these developments. Think critically about the complexities here, the relationship, and just how vital international efforts are for promoting peace and stability in the region.